welcome everyone. Can't see your faces, but I'm excited Rachel and I are both excited to share a bit about 3box with you. We'll kind of kick off the workshop with an overview of the tech and how things work, and then we'll kind of dive into more technical details about how you can use 3box to set and get data to a user-controlled data store on IPFS, and potentially some ideas of how it can integrate into Erasure. So yeah, let me pull up the presentation. Bear with me 1 second. All right. Can you, there we go. Run to the beginning. Cool. So thanks all for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to be here. So yeah, like I said, we're just going to talk about how 3box can help deliver distributed user-controlled data storage for apps on IPFS. And a bit about us is just some background context so you know who you're hearing from. I'm Michael, co-founder and CEO of 3box. Been working at 3box for a little more than 1.5 years now. And prior to that, I was a co-founder of Viewport, which, if you're familiar with, was a self-sovereign identity project on Ethereum. So yeah, I'll let Rachel introduce herself as well.
Hi, my name's Rachel. I'm a DevRel lead here over at 3box. I've been with the team for just around a month. Previous to this, I have experience working with other blockchains and also in the identity space as well. And before that, I was also working as a JavaScript developer. So yeah.
Thanks. All right, so let's get right into it. So kind of why we're here and sort of the definition of a problem statement is that this shouldn't come as a surprise to any of you, but today in Web 2 context, data is app siloed and scattered. So basically, like, you have, and it causes and results in various different kinds of problems that manifest themselves, around poor security. So if data is kept on as a single server in a big honeypot where all users' data is stored behind some, app managed security practices, you see a lot of breaches and violations of privacy. Also asymmetric power. So if apps are sort of storing data in a place where only they control and they have sole power of and authority over, you have like this asymmetric power relationship between users and the applications. Fragmented Ux. So if users have to create new registrations at every single place they go and sort of have the cold start problem of onboarding, it's really poor UX. And so it'd be better if users can onboard into like a rich environment where all of their previous history and interactions could also be represented to smooth that process. And a backend. So while this may not have been seen as a problem in sort of like a Web 2 context, in Web 3, where developers are trying to build trust minimized, decentralized peer-to-peer applications and they actually don't want to run a backend, this is like sort of a solution to some of those problems. And so if you want to provide a lot of the same functionality that users have come to expect or that you might want to deliver in a Web 2 app, but in a Web 3 app, you need a replacement for that backend in some public open context. And so really where we're headed and sort of where 3box is bringing us is to a situation where data is unified with users on the open web. And so regardless of the application that a user is using, and regardless of the wallet or the keys that they're using to sign in and authenticate to that app, a user's data should be interoperable and portable. And so what this model gives you is really granular access control. So because the user is always in control of it, the user can decide who gets what when. And so they can, share data across different apps and services. They can decide who gets to see their encrypted private data, etc. So really like replacing that asymmetric power imbalance by giving control to the user. Distributed storage, so not a central server, also not a blockchain, because blockchain storage isn't really scalable. And when used for dynamic, constantly updating content, it's actually not efficient and you have to pay for it and it's a poor user experience. Cryptographic security. So what this model does is when users are controlling their just databases on the peer-to-peer web with their cryptographic keys that they control, every single update happens client-side and happens as a result of a signature that a user makes on a piece of data, or an encryption key that they can also encrypt that data with and store it. And so you really have these cryptographic access control and signing guarantees that sort of make the system viable in a decentralized context. Also, you get interoperability across platforms and networks because data is not tied to a specific cryptographic key pair, but is rather associated to a decentralized identity, which provides an abstraction on top of those keys to actually control the data. And I'll talk a bit more about this abstraction and decentralized identity in a few slides. And so just as we're like setting context here, here's an example of a simple app, let's call it a media site, in a more traditional web context and with a more traditional architecture. And you can really, like, without going into too many details here, and this is more gestural anyway, you can really see that it requires a lot of integrations and a lot of different pieces working together to take care of authentication and user data management and storage, as well as thinking about like importing third-party user data from other sources. It just requires a lot of complexity and a few back-end developers. And so in this new serverless or like front-end distributed web, we can dramatically simplify this model by just, instead of keeping data on servers, keeping it with the user. And so really, you can see that this is a much simpler model where users can authenticate with their existing wallet keys and sort of control and manage this single data store or an orchestration of multiple data stores that just requires a simpler integration with an application. And that not only increases security, but is also like, you know, less infrastructure and less back-end developers. So now front-end devs can build full-stack apps in a way. And so now we'll kind of get into like the core of what makes $3 possible, and it's really this concept of a decentralized identity, or more specifically, a decentralized identifier, a DID. So for some context and background, decentralized identity, I generally like to avoid the term just because people have so many different notions of what it might mean. So it can mean everything from an abstract decentralized identifier, such as the one that we use here, or some people consider it to be proof of individuality or proof of being a human, or here's my digital driver's license and like a verified credential. And so while all these are components of the identity ecosystem, in our context, we're particularly talking about an abstract identifier. And so ours is called 3ID. It's actually like not ours. We're in the process of opening it up and sort of making it an open standard. But what it is it provides data identity, access control, and encryption for decentralized databases. And so wherever those databases are hosted or wherever they live, and whatever keys a user chooses to use and whatever wallet provider they choose to trust, it provides a nice abstraction that guarantees control and interoperability between this ecosystem of participants. So, you know, you can see how right now the 3ID can sign and encrypt data that's stored in OrbitDB instances, which is a peer-to-peer database protocol that runs on top of IPFS, and sort of uses the libp2p pub/sub underneath it to sync data across all the nodes. And so we started out by just offering storage for one key. So like if you had MetaMask, you could go to an app and the decentralized application could request to, you know, through the Ethereum provider API, I want to access this profile or this space in a user's 3-box. And if the user approved the message, then it would generate the 3ID from that signature and the entropy in the signature. And then from that 3ID, we would derive a signing key and an encryption key. And those would be the database keys that you use to interact. And so now we've broadened that to allow users to associate many different key pairs and authenticate with all of their keys while still maintaining control and consent over all of their data. And of course, applications in this context are always, since everything happens client-side, when a user logs in, the app can get access to the data they request, and that's approved by the user. And then when the user leaves, they don't have it. And so it's sort of a more secure, robust model. Here's just another visualization. So calling out some benefits here. And Rachel, can you check out it to see someone's asking a question, I think. Yes. So the webinar is being recorded. And if it's okay, we can, we have a bunch of time at the end set aside for questions, but we can also stop in between the first half and the second half of the presentation to address any that are bubbling up. So no problem. I think in a couple slides, we'll be at a stopping point and we can answer that. So yeah, so it makes data wallet and account agnostic. So from the authentication side, it doesn't matter what you use, you can always control your data. And it's also network agnostic. So any blockchain key or account type can be supported, and even non-blockchain key and account types. And so, you know, you're not only creating interoperable data ecosystem on Ethereum, but rather across Web3, and in the future, even Web 2. It's scalable, so nothing touches the blockchain in 3box. It's all done on IPFS and OrbitDB. And so you don't have the friction and wait times of like storing data on chain. There's no friction in onboarding. You don't need to acquire tokens to use it. And it's flexible. So it's really like an open system for user-controlled database management and peer-to-peer networks. And you can, and we'll talk about a bunch of the use cases in a bit. And so actually, I think now might be a good time to pause before I turn it over to Rachel and answer the question about key differences between 3box and its competitors. So as it currently stands, there aren't many doing this in a user-controlled way. So particularly the main differentiator in 3box is this 3ID system, is a system for controlling data on different databases. So we kind of sit nicely between other open protocols, so like IPFS and OrbitDB, which is a database on top of IPFS. There are other databases such as Textile that also run on IPFS that we're in the process of working out how to support them. And we're also account agnostic. And so we're kind of like this 3ID is this thin layer in the middle, which enables all of these use cases. 3box, the organization, produces a bunch of developer tools and APIs and infrastructure that make it super easy to add a bunch of functionalities to apps for developers. I would say if there are any competitors, like one might be Blockstack, but they aren't used in really the same contexts. Blockstack is more of like a monolithic architecture where you have to kind of wholesale adopt it. And sort of like they're trying to build their own ecosystem of Blockstack apps, whereas we're just trying to integrate all of the different ecosystems so that it's actually like a more open source, collaborative, composable ecosystem. Besides them, there aren't really, there are like others in the ballpark would be those just providing straight IPFS storage or IPFS pinning. But that doesn't really solve the problems of like more dynamic structured content in databases. Another one would be if you just kind of store things on IPFS and pin them and then store the hash on the blockchain, but that doesn't lend itself to content that can be updated, since those hashes are always, if the content changes, the hash changes, you have to republish it on chain. And so I guess those would be some of the people in the ballpark of what we're doing, but really we saw a huge gap between like, we saw like a huge need and gap here where like we wanted to be wallet agnostic and provide user controlled data storage for apps, and plug into as many ecosystem components as we could. And so that's sort of how we got to where we are now. Hopefully that answers your question. Cool. Rachel.
Cool. So thank you for that, Michael. I'm going to just talk a little bit more about the developer specifics and what the developer experience is like, as well as doing a short code demo of how to actually work with 3box storage and 3box spaces in particular. Just going to set this up to share my screen. So what does 3box offer for developers? Distributed database storage. And this means that you can get rid of, if you have a decentralized application and you have some data that's not suitable to be stored on chain, you can get rid of a centralized server if you're using it. It's also allowing you to work with IPFS without any of the complexities. We also talk about distributed database storage rather than, and that sort of differentiates us between working direct with IPFS, as in with OrbitDB, it's giving that database structure, which is much more suited to kind of user data and the way we'd work with databases in a kind of the way we'd work with data in a more traditional web 2.0 application. So yeah, that's just a very easy way to work with distributed database storage in 3box. We can start building data-rich and composable applications. So we've seen that decentralized applications that have been often built so far are not incredibly data-rich. As Michael has mentioned, there's a number of problems with storing data on chain, not least the cost and the speed of that. Using 3box can allow you to kind of build up the data so that you are creating a more similar and a more seamless experience that your users will be used to and will be expecting from the applications that they've used on Web 2.0. Nice thing here is you can build a composable application. So I'm going to show you later on in this how you can store data to a space. Now, in 3box, as long as you have the user's consent, you can actually pull in data into your application from other spaces. Now, users will have to kind of cryptographically consent to that and click sign through their wallet type, be it MetaMask or otherwise. But that allows you to actually kind of pull in data from other apps and actually opens up a whole range of interesting use cases, and also prevents users from getting locked into one application. And you can do all of, as Michael's already mentioned, you can do all of this with just front-end code, and that's great for sort of React developers like me. We don't have to kind of worry about bringing in the complexity of a server. Cool. So what we got in our web development toolkit, so Spaces API. I'm going to be showing you that in a minute. Spaces API is basically where you can store data in a kind of context-specific location, and this can be either private and encrypted or public and stored kind of in plain text. This will always be user-controlled storage. As we said in 3box, everything we do is about bringing users kind of control and transparency over what's happening back to them. We've also got profiles. Profiles does function similarly to Spaces, but it's not designed to be kind of context specific. So, for example, if you're building an application, you'd probably create a space for that application, and you might even drill down and be a bit more granular than that. Profiles is for global data, so it's great for usernames and global avatars, and you can also add in verified accounts, things like that. Again, you can, with profiles, you can store in both a private and public form. Threads is where we start to get a lot more social, and this is where you can have data that you want to share amongst users. So it's great for messaging, any kind of social media sharing kind of context, so things like social walls, comments, etc. And it's also good for things such as shopping trolleys, because it's got a penned format. And threads, they come in two different formats. We have persistent threads, which makes use of persisting the thread to IPFS and OrbitDB, as we do with spaces and profiles. And we also have ghost threads. And ghost threads, there's nothing persisted, so it's just kind of pure in-memory communication between peers. And then, so those are our APIs for web developers. We also have built some plugins, which is really nice for us developers, because you can drop these in, and between 10 to 30 minutes, you can start demoing this and start integrating it into your applications. They're kind of fully developed React components that come with styling, etc. So what we built on those, at the moment we've got 3. We have comments, so it's a comment wall, so it's great for any kind of social application. If you have images you're sharing, or perhaps you are building a kind of marketplace and you want your users to comment on the goods that are for sale, comment box is great for that. We've got profile hovers. Something that we've seen is that users don't really connect very well with Ethereum addresses and kind of hex codes. So profile hovers, it takes an Ethereum address and it pulls out the profile data around that account. So you can start to see users' names, you can see their avatars, and it gives you a lot more context to who you're dealing with. And it's a really nice way to add a bit more of a human touch to your application. I think some of the developer community who've worked with that have found that it creates a bit more stickiness and engagement with their users kind of adding that personality to it. And then finally, we've got a chat box, and chat box is a super easy way that you can just drop in chat functionality. That's built on top of Ghost Threads, so that is pure peer-to-peer messaging. Nothing is persisted there. But you can think about it, it's like dropping in the kind of Poloniex troll box, and you can have kind of website-wide chat rooms and things like that. So what does this allow us to do? So developers, we can build better apps today. And I think one of the big things that 3box does for you is it allows you to focus on your value add and not on infrastructure. So rather than spending hours and days and however long building your own kind of messaging system and figuring out how you want to handle storage in your application, 3box does that for you. So you've got a lot more time and a lot more focus to build on the value add in your business proposition. Can also allow you to kind of build things much quicker and kind of rapidly iterate and prototype it as well. Acquire and onboard new users. As Michael said, there's not as much friction because users don't have to spend gas. They can also bring over their profile data, and it's a very kind of seamless onboarding experience for them as well. We can start building applications that use rich data to inform a great user experience. So kind of bringing that more Web 2.0 experience and the ones that your users will be more familiar with. So everything from profiles to, you even building up the user experience on the data that you're storing in spaces yourself. Simple, low overhead architecture. Now, this is something that seems to really click with a lot of our developer community, just the kind of simplicity of what we're doing, but also how it works alongside other tech in the space. And it really kind of fits in and provides something quite unique in the ecosystem, and also very essential for developers to work with. And finally, for things to just work, 3box, we have a real focus on shipping things and building tech that is tangible and developers can get their hands on. And for things to work, it's incredibly important to us, and it's something we consistently get a positive feedback on. So what does this mean for your end users? We can give them a convenient and delightful user experience. And I think it's something that, there is a lot of awareness in the space that user experience is not really where it should be. Using 3box there's many ways that it can deliver on an enhanced user experience, from everything from just, quick wins by dropping in some of our plugins to actually starting to bring in more sophisticated and meaningful data via our storage and threads APIs. Simple onboarding. Just as for developers, it's going to be easier for us to onboard and acquire new users. That's also obviously a benefit to end users. I think, like most of us, we're pretty fed up of kind of creating new accounts and adding in the same profile data for new services that we're working with. And a personal bugbear of mine is adding my profile picture to every new Slack channel that I join. Users, we take a lot of that friction out so they can onboard with us, and if they don't have a 3box account, it's just simply made for them, and if they do, they can bring that profile data over and start building on top of that. Personalization and relevance and value. Now this comes from enabling this kind of rich use of data, which allows us to build applications that are much more tailored and much more personalized to our users, and ultimately that's going to bring them a lot more value. Security and privacy without burden, so users can store stuff in an encrypted way. They're also always made aware of when they're accessing a new space or when they're accessing 3box, so that's really going a long way to give them a lot more transparency around how their data is used. And similarly for end users, it's really important that things just work. And again, our emphasis on shipping things and getting them out into the world has really helped us with that. So I don't have a demo for you for the plugins, but I think it's actually, this slide's quite nice to just kind of have a quick look at what they look like. So over here on the left, we have the comment plugin. Now, as you can see, it's something that we're very familiar with the kind of traditional web. And you can just drop that in under kind of anything that you'd want your users to comment on and engage on, be it a social profile or an item for sale. And as I mentioned, Chatbox is kind of a Trollbox type of plugin, and you can drop that in site-wide, or you could build a context-specific chatbot. a really handy way to allow your users to communicate and have kind of peer-to-peer messaging. And then finally over here on the right, we have our profile hover, and you'll see that it's really making Web3 development a lot more human and a lot more engaging for your users. And in this example, we can see we've got an image, we've got Michael's username here, and we've also got some verified accounts attached to that as well. And all of these you can add to application within sort of 10 to 30 minutes, and it's really not much overhead at all. But the next thing, I'm just going to do a quick demo, and today we're just focusing on storage. So if I just drop over into my code editor, and here I've set up some sort of very basic boilerplate. And all it's doing is, this is just something I made with Create React app, where I'm pulling in 3 blocks, and then this has been set up to work with MetaMask. So using MetaMask, we are just pulling in the user's Ethereum address and also enabling the provider, the Ethereum provider there. And then I've created these 2 methods. So we have save to space and get from space. As you can imagine, this is where we're going to save data to spaces, which is 3-box storage, and then also retrieve data from 3-box storage as well. So let's dive in and write some code. The first thing, whenever you're working with 3-box, is you need to authenticate with 3-box, and I will do this here. Of course, when we're working with authentication, this is cryptographic authentication, but it will be asynchronous, so we can use await here. And we on box, we can just use this method, which is open box, and it just takes 2 arguments. The first one being the user's Ethereum account. So here we can see we've actually already saved that to the state of this demo application. So we can just do this dot state dot accounts. I think MetaMask gives us the accounts in an array format, so we'll just select the first one in the array there. I think there's only one anyway. And then we also pass in the Ethereum provider, and with MetaMask that would just be window.ethereum. Cool. So we've done that. We can just add a console log to let us know that we've authenticated in with 3-box, so like 3-box auth. So now we've done that, we can actually create a space for this application. As I said, spaces are where we store data in a context-specific way. So create a space here. Again, we're working with asynchronicity, so let's use await. Just before we do this, because this is a React application, I'm just going to save the 3-box account that we've authenticated with to the React state. So set state box. There we go. So then then to authenticate with a space, it looks quite similar to how we open the box, but we'll do this dot state dot box. We saved it to state, so we can use that. And then we do open space. And this only takes 1 argument, and that will be the name of the space that we are opening. So in this case, we can call it Erasure hackathon. Once we've done that, we just want to make sure that the space is synced correctly. So we can do space.sync done. We'll just add a console log in between. Opened space. And we'll console log after we have synced as well. Console dot log space sync. And before we start saving stuff, I'm just going to just jump over into the browser and just check that's working. Sorry about this. One second. I'm gonna jump over quickly into my cheat sheet. Sorry. Open space. So we have open box, and we're passing in this .state.accounts, which is correct here. And we have our window.ethereum, and then we are, using the box to call the open space method with the Erasure hackathon name. Just give me a second.
Is it space.syncdon? Is that it?
So yeah, thank you. So we actually need to add an await in front of that. So thank you for that catch. Just reset this. And then our application should just be loading. And hopefully we shall see it come up. Based on. Here we go. So here we can also see this save to space. We have, we're calling that on this button here. So I'll jump right over and I'll hit that. And we should see that the IPFS is listening here. And then I think we should be prompted to sign with MetaMask. Now, it could be that we just did that and it's saved that in storage. But I think MetaMask is going to ask for the users to sign the request to open the 3-box. Oh yeah, so we can see 3box.auth and it's opening up MetaMask for us to sign. So we're signing yes, we want to open the space. And then we can see that we've opened the space and the space has been synced there as well. Cool. So now that we have that, we can actually start working with spaces and we can start saving some data there. So, before we do that, let's just also save it to React state. So this .set state space. So now we can use await this .state .space. And first of all, so in this demo, we're going to have a go at saving to both private and public space, but let's first work with the public space. So we'll do public, and then we will call the .set method on that. So when we're working with spaces and we're setting data to it, we will pass in 2 arguments and it will work as a key value. So if we pass in our key, and our key can be mascot, and the value will be narwhal. So those of you who've been following 3box will know we have quite a cute narwhal mascot. So I'll put that in there, and I'll just add a console log to say that mascot saved. Cool. So now we've done that, we could jump back over into the application and have just a double check that it is saving and we're seeing that console log. So again, it's opening up IPFS. We'll see that because we've already signed for that space, MetaMask won't ask for our signature on that again. But we should see those auth logs starting to come in through there again. So 3 blocks space synced, and our mascot has been saved. So then so that's all you need to really do to set data to a public space. We can see that's actually very minimal code, and it's very intuitive, the developer experience there as well. So to retrieve it, we'll go into this function here, and we'll just create a variable. We'll just create a constant. We'll call it mascot, because we're going to query for the mascot. And again, we're working with asynchronicity, so we'll use await. This dot state dot space, and we're again working with the public space. And this time, instead of using the set method, we're going to use the get method. So we just get, and the get method only takes one argument, and that one argument would be the key for the value we're retrieving. So we go and do mascot, and then after that, let's just console log this to check that we're getting the correct value out. Mascot. Cool. So if we dive back over and one more time around the authentication flow, save storage. This, for those of you who are quite beady-eyed, you'll notice that this is quite a naive implementation. You wouldn't want to have this exposed for the users to click ahead of the space being saved to state, but I've kept it simple just for the purposes of demo, just to show you the methods that we use to kind of set and get data.
Yeah, I'll also add too that like in production, you would probably perform all the required authentication steps as the user's logging in. So like open box and open space or open spaces. And once that's saved to state, then as a user just like edits their profile or does an action, your app can automatically save that data. The user doesn't actually have to constantly interact like that.
Cool. Yeah. So we can definitely make this much more optimized. So for the purposes of simplicity, we'll have it like this. So now if I click get from storage, we can see that we're logging out the value, which was in this case narwhal. So that's working with public spaces. Now working with private spaces is incredibly similar. So we will write something to a private space. So we'll do this dot state dot space, and instead of working with a public, you guessed it, we're going to be working with private. So again, we'll use the set method, and it just takes 2 arguments, which are the key value pairs. So in this case, we can have mascot secret, and a secret might be I ate all the cake, and let's just add a cake emoji. There we go. And then dropping down into our get from space method. Just as we did for the mascot, we'll create another constant from the mascot secret. This time, of course, we're referencing the private and not the public. And then just passing in the key there. Of course, you need to be mindful that it is the same capitalization and spacing when we're working with keys here. Then I will console log this out. Go. And then just jump back over to this. But as you can see, it's a very easy way to kind of work with storage, and in some ways it's actually got a lot less complexity than we're used to when we're dealing with data as front-end developers. It's a very minimal API for us to work with, and one that makes a lot of sense. So if I go to line 39, yeah, my bad. Sorry about that. And now we'll just do this one last time just so that we can see that getting the private data is just, in terms of when you work with it as a front-end developer, identical to kind of working with public data. And this is, if you want to start working just with a front-end application and storing data in this way, you can rapidly start building these kind of data-rich applications. Now, this is, of course, a very trivial example, but you can imagine much more useful data on your users being stored in this way, or any application data that you would like to store.
And it's also worth calling out too how encryption is done. So if you store things privately, it's actually deriving an encryption key. All updates are signed by the user signing key derived from their 3ID, but the encryption key is also derived from the 3ID, and that is when data is encrypted, it's symmetrically encrypted in OrbitDB.
Cool. So then if we hit this, we can see that we got back our private encryption just in the same way here, and we console logged it out there. So now I think so there we go. That's just a very that's a very basic demo, but you can see that you can easily start integrating the system into kind of any decentralized application that you're working with. I'm just going to hand back over to Michael, and he's going to just give us a kind of overview of the apps that are currently using 3box right now. I'll just stop sharing my screen. Stop share.
Great. Cool. So yeah, just want to talk a bit about ecosystem adoption and how this is being used in the real world by production apps. So as you now know, 3box provides a range of functionalities that could be valuable to a range of applications and infrastructure services. So starting with like profiles. So the simplest integration is simply to call our get profile API and return profile data for an Ethereum address. And that's really what Moloch DAO is doing and what Portis is doing, as well as Humanity DAO. And there's also, you can use it to set profile information from within your app. And that's really what Aragon and LivePeer are doing. So allowing users to create profiles if they don't have one as well. So that's fully integrating the profiles API. And again, it's more just about providing social context and social identity on community collaboration platforms. Secondly, and then like a slightly more complex integration would be something like the wallets are now doing. So we're seeing a lot of wallets integrate spaces and private encrypted storage for user wallet data. So like MetaMask is now, they create a MetaMask space and they're storing encrypted wallet configuration and settings information, as well as your contact list. And what that does is the value prop there is just sort of liberating the user's data from local storage, and in the process, making it super easy to sync that data across all of your MetaMask-enabled devices. And so before, like I'm sure some of you might be familiar, you could like update a name or add some data to your MetaMask account on Chrome, but then if you go to Firefox and you install MetaMask, like that data is not there, even if you have the same key and you exported your mnemonic. Now that will all stay the same. And so that was like a pretty big one for us. Also for Ethereum, a different kind of wallet. So Ethereum is a contract wallet. They're using 3box to store an encrypted key store backup for the user's device keys. So with a contract wallet, you have a contract that's controlled by various different Ethereum keys. And providing storage in that environment is somewhat tricky because you can't encrypt and store data directly with the key because it's isolated and wouldn't be shared. So they use 3ID and 3box to create a way to encrypt and store this key store in such a way that it's, even if the Ethereum services go down, a user can always regain access to their smart contract account for security and privacy. Also, on the more social side of things, some of the market-based platforms like Augur and Gnosis are integrating our plugins. So Augur is using is in the process of integrating the comments plugin to add comments on each prediction market, and they're integrating the chat box to add like a troll box and a site-wide chat to Augur, calling it Augur Chat. Gnosis also is using the comments plugin to make comments on prediction markets. Foam is using 3box in cool ways. So someone hacked together a location-based review system. So if you can go to like a point of interest on the Foam map, you get a little pop-up in the corner that lets you like make a comment in a thread on that location. And so it's kind of like a decentralized Foursquare or like Yelp or Google Maps reviews. Just some use cases, a variety of different kinds of platforms, but hopefully that helps you get the idea. And so now some ideas for Erasure. We chatted with the team prior to this talk, and these were some things we came up with. This is only a starting point, but sure, you can store data or predictions from Erasure with 3box. Instead of on the Erasure IPFS pinning nodes, you could put it in a 3box, and actually what you might want to do is store it use the 3box API to store it publicly, but continue to use the Erasure encryption scheme for like commit reveal. So that way, like the Erasure system encrypts the data, it's stored quote unquote publicly in a user's 3box. So that way, when the key is revealed and the information is disclosed, it then becomes public. So you're sort of separating the encryption and the storage in that way. Also, you can do social profiles for Erasure applications. I think that's pretty straightforward and self-explanatory, but yeah, you can provide a lot of rich context and let users import their profile from elsewhere or create application-specific profiles. You can also create comments on data feeds or predictor accounts. On 3box Hub, which is at 3box.io/hub, users can comment on other users' profiles, kind of like a wall. And so you can think of that same type of a system for certain prediction streams or predictor accounts. It's kind of like open there. Also, you can create topic-based chat rooms. So if you're a set of people that care about a certain type of data or have some sort of like context-specific conversations, you can create these chat rooms. You can also create site-wide chat rooms. And there's like almost infinite other possibilities, but those are just a start. And so before we jump to Q&A, I just wanted to call out some of these links. All of our docs are available at docs.3box.io. We're always available, and we have an open Discord community. And you can find that at chat.3box.io. That will just point you to Discord. Yeah, we publish a lot of stuff on our blog, so there's always product releases and announcements there, as well as tutorials and architecture information. Yeah, and if you want to email us too, that's cool. We do that as well. But thanks, Rachel. Yeah, just wanted to drop these here before we go into Q&A. So now we have like 10 minutes or so, and we're happy to open it up to questions that anyone may have.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael and Rachel.
Sure, Aaron, happy to answer. What did you mean? So good question. So 3box.io hub is actually just something we built as a way to, yeah, exactly. So we built it as a way for a user to create and manage their profile in their profile store, as well as view all the information that apps have saved with them to give them the feeling of control. So it's not like I can't go there and just like add a file like you would in Dropbox. But instead, all the data you see, if you navigate from the profile tab to the data tab in the top right, as you start to accumulate data, you can see all of your spaces and you can open them and see all the data that's in them. And you can even remove that data. So you kind of have the ability to control your information and delete stuff if you want to. And so it's more just like a visualization of your 3box rather than a way to directly like upload files like Dropbox. Does that make sense? Would I be able to integrate D3? Rachel, any input on that?
So D3, the data visualization library.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Aaron,
So this, I mean, with 3box, because we are working, you can work with either a React front end. We can also work with a pure JavaScript front end. So once you pull this data in, you would be able to integrate it into 3box.js. But it would depend on the data that you had, what it would look like and what that exact integration would look like. So think of like 3box as being very as like a very minimal kind of way to bring in data that can fit alongside the libraries that you're used to using in the kind of web front end environment.
Yes, I guess you could. It just depends on if there's the types of data in there that would make it meaningful.
Yeah, exactly.
So like if you can imagine an app or like something that streams your location to a private thread or something, then you might be able to create some meaningful visualizations out of that.
And you could also just use like chart.js if you don't want to like go for the full capability of like D3.js as well.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for joining.
Cheers.
Any other questions? Can hang out for a few minutes if you need, but if there aren't any more questions, then Shreyas, we may turn it over back to you.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Michael. Yes, and if you have any further questions, you can join Discord. Michael and Rachel and the entire 3box team are really active on their Discord channels. I'm sure you'll get your answers there. Thanks so much for joining us for this wonderful workshop, and thank you, Michael and Rachel, for facilitating this workshop. It was really useful. There's one last question, I guess, from Santiago. Is there any blog post explaining how Ethereum is using 3box for key management?
Yeah, definitely. I'm pulling it up right now. Give me 1 second, Santiago. Cool. I just published it this morning. It's just loading. Santiago dropped in the chat. Yep, you're welcome.
Cool, awesome. Thanks, everyone. You have 7 minutes back in your day. Thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Take care, all. Thank you.
Thank you.